where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli, and I'm reporting here from quite a cold, grim, dark, icy Budapest, where the winter is still quite a long way from completion. So, thank you, everybody who has joined me. I really appreciate it. It is time for our Tuesday night live stream. And there's a few things to discuss. And one thing that, and there's still a couple of things to um, raise from the Munich security conference. I mean, we already covered that in some detail, but I just want one or two things that I think it's worth mentioning. So, if you recall, we had the uh, the meeting in Budapest yesterday between U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. And of course, it was a very warm meeting, and Rubio was very warm about Orban. And of course, Rubio had somebody asked me, "Have you heard about Jesse Jackson's death?" Yes, I did hear about that, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And so this was immediately after Munich. Rubio flew first to Bratislava to speak to the Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico, and then he went on to Viktor Orban, and his message in Hungary was really quite stark. He said that, well, we are living in this golden age of American-Hungarian relations, but it is predicated on one thing: the personal relationship and rapport between Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and President Trump. President Trump really likes him. He considers him a friend. And when asked, well, would President Trump maintain good relations with Orban's successor, should he prevail in the next election, he just said the good relations that Hungary enjoys with the United States is wholly dependent upon the friendship and rapport between President Trump and Prime Minister Orban. In other words, the message was, don't count on it. If you vote Orban out, it's a whole new ball game. Doesn't mean that there'll be bad relations, but it's a whole new ball game that you'll have. So that was a quite stark warning from Rubio. But what was perhaps fortunate for Rubio yesterday was that no reporter brought up a kind of an embarrassing episode from the not too distant past, namely 2019. So during Trump's first term, when a group of senators, a group that, of course, included Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, this group of senators wrote to President Trump, warning him about getting too friendly with, yes, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. So let's just look at this. Is the letter that was sent. When was it? It was just about the time then Orban came to the United States. So this was a first visit of a Hungarian prime minister for a while, and that must have been sometime in the late spring of 2019. Let's just see, where is this? Yeah, May the 10th, 2019, and here is the letter. Honorable Donald J. Trump, and we are writing in advance of your scheduled meeting with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban to express concern about Hungary's downward democratic trajectory and the implications for US interests in Central Europe. We urge you to raise these issues in your meeting with the Prime Minister. In recent years, democracy in Hungary has significantly eroded. So that's a familiar kind of left liberal cry. And if you recall, um, Joe Biden, when he became president in 2021, and he decided that he was going to go on this global democratic crusade and to separate the world out into democracies and autocracies. So we have the democracies on one side, the good guys, that's us, and then we have the autocracies on the other side, the bad guys. And so he had this democracy summit. He had, I think, 2 democracy summits, and he pointedly did not invite Hungary to the democracy summits, which was an odd slight, given that Hungary is a member of the European Union and a member of NATO. Anyway, so it says, as Dalibor Rohac from the AEI recently observed, Hungary has experienced a steady corrosion of freedom. Corrosion of freedom. Maybe he means erosion of freedom. The rule of law and quality of governance, according to virtually any indicator, including the assessments of the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute and the World Bank. The Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom places the protection of property rights in Hungary in the mostly unfree category. Freedom House recently downgraded Hungary to partly free status, the first European Union country and the first post-communist country to experience such a decline. Under Orban, the election process has become less competitive, and the judiciary is increasingly controlled by the state. So, it's a familiar litany. Press freedom has declined, as advertisers have been strongly discouraged from placing ads in independent outlets, and ownership has been consolidated under a foundation that is exempt from antitrust regulation. And then, while the US has sought to counter Kremlin aggression against Europe, so this is 2019. So this is 3 years before the war in Ukraine. While the US has sought to counter Kremlin aggression across Europe, we remain profoundly concerned about the close relationship between this NATO partner and Moscow. Hungary has failed to diversify its energy resources away from Moscow. Hungary has allowed Russia to exploit its golden visa system to evade US sanctions. The relocation of the International Investment Bank from Moscow to Budapest is an exercise in Russian power projection. Most disturbingly, despite an extradition request from the United States based on an existing and active bilateral treaty, Hungary has rejected the request and sent 2 arms dealers to their freedom in Moscow. And then it goes on, about Pompeo. Secretary of Pompeo said this. And then, of course, yes, the happy members of 1956, Americans proudly supported Hungarian freedom fighters against Soviet invaders in 1956. And the world was inspired 30 years ago this month when Hungary torn down the fence between their country and Austria. A landmark event in 1989's remarkable democratic transitions across Europe. So we like the Hungarians when they're pursuing our policies, what's good for us, but we don't like it when they're pursuing policies that serve their own interests. And of course, 1956. But of course, if you ask any Hungarian, what's your take on 1956? They'll say, "Hey, the Americans encouraged us to rise up against the Soviets, and then did nothing to help us." Which is a fair point. A little bit exaggerated as to whether the Americans really asked them to rise up, but it's a fair argument. So it's a little much for these senators to start bringing up 56, which at least for the Hungarians is definitely a sore point. That they were crushed by the Red Army, and the Americans didn't do anything to help them. Anyway, here is the letters. Who are the letter writers? James Risch. He was the Republican chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Robert Menendez, you remember him, the New Jersey senator in prison, and Janine Shaheen, absolute rabid Russophobe Democrat, and Marco Rubio, United States senator. So that it was useful that wasn't uh, brought up yesterday. Now, to be fair, Rubio has changed many of his views in adapting himself to Trump's agenda, and he often does say that this is President Trump's agenda, and I'm merely the implementer of the agenda. Um, the one thing is very interesting, and I think that's something that needs to be always kept in mind, is that whenever they're berating lack of economic freedom and whatever in Hungary, Hungary has pursued a very distinctive policy of trying to maintain the Hungarianization of the economy. So, in other words, basically not to allow foreign investors, particularly German investors, essentially to take over the Hungarian economy. So Hungary, under Orban, particularly after he came back in 2010, has pursued a policy of trying to keep as much of the Hungarian economy under the control of Hungarians. So naturally, the EU isn't very happy about that. The Americans aren't necessarily very happy about that. But so they say, oh, well, there's no economic freedom in Hungary. And somebody else, did he talk about Rubio's speech? Yes, yes. So if you tune in to the recording of yesterday's live stream, we talked quite extensively about Rubio's speech, and actually quite positively. So I don't want to go over the same ground because I talked about it at some length yesterday. Now, the another aspect which is quite interesting of of Munich was the attendance there. This is of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and why it's I think it's interesting is that without question the much of the liberal media was seeking to promote her there as the rising star of the Democratic Party. So, her performance, and as we'll see, she was very upset that she got this very negative coverage. But the reason why she received negative coverage, and not it was the negative coverage came from I think some observers. The New York Times, however, did not give her negative coverage. But what's important to keep in mind is that this was absolutely a coming out for her. That she went there with a view to burnishing her foreign policy credentials, and that's very, very important because Jimmy Carter, when he really was a very obscure figure, he was just simply a one-term governor of Georgia. He had to show that he knew something about foreign affairs. I mean, nobody knew who he was, obviously, but he began planning his presidential run already immediately after the Democratic debacle in the 1972 election. And one key act that he undertook was to join the Trilateral Commission. The Trilateral Commission, as you know, that was the thing run by David Rockefeller, and so it was a lot of Rockefeller money and all kinds of important corporate chiefs were involved, and of course, one of the key figures within the Trilateral Commission was Zbigniew Brzezinski. And so it was there at the Trilateral Commission that this obscure governor of Georgia bonded with Zbigniew Brzezinski, and that gave him the foreign policy credibility that he needed. Now, the problem for AOC was that if she had simply shown herself to be, let's say, but she doesn't really know. She doesn't know where Kazakhstan is or Kyrgyzstan is or whatever. Okay, that's fine. I mean, she's from Queens. She doesn't know what these places are. That's okay. The problem for her, however, is a more serious one. She doesn't have anything to say. So it's not a matter of, I got this wrong or I got that wrong. You can, everyone can say, okay, well, fine. She's not very experienced. She's she's been focusing on domestic policy, doesn't know much about international affairs. But the problem is that she doesn't have anything to say, and so the supposed firebrand, radical, lefty, really is a purveyor of absolutely uninteresting conventional thinking, because there is absolutely a role for a kind of a leftish politician in foreign policy. Okay, leftish politician. Yeah, I don't know much about international affairs, but I do have some principles. And one of the principles that leftish politicians in the past adhered to was that they supported peace. They were against anything that led to wars. So that could have been her calling card. That I want peace. But of course, these kind of fake lefties like Court AOC, and before her, Bernie Sanders, they are not supporters of peace. What Sanders' entire shtick was, he's against wars that are waged by Republicans. He is supportive of wars waged by Democrats. Or if he doesn't wholly support them, he kind of waffles and doesn't really come out with any clear position. So Sanders, and he was then a congressman from Vermont, absolutely unequivocally supported the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999. Absolutely, it was bomb the Serbs. Then then of course he made the whole thing. We'll go with George Bush's war. You're against Bush's war. Yeah, that's an easy one. Yes, he is against Bush's war. But then when Obama took office, and of course Obama launched the attack, unprovoked attack on Libya, Sanders just kind of waffled, and nobody ever knew what the hell his view on Libya was. So that's really and Sanders is obviously the inspiration for AOC, and that's why she's unable really to articulate any interesting, coherent, and radical position when it comes to foreign policy. Here is so the New York Times ran no less than 2 lengthy articles about AOC's debut in Munich. So let's take a look at what first of all, here is the tweet that AUC sent out. So here she is. So she says, "We expose the global far right's playbook at Munich." So the global far right's playbook at Munich. I mean, what the hell has the global far right got to do with Munich? The Munich was entirely a gab fest engaged in by the familiar foreign policy security elites who always show up at Munich and talk their familiar talk. We got to do this to Russia. We got to stand up to Russia, Putin, Ukraine, and so on. And of course, Iran. Got to deal with Iran, the threat from Iran. So these are the people there. That was Schmerz. That was Keir Starmer. That was Stubb, the president of Finland. These are the people who were at Munich. What far right was in Munich, and how to stop them? So that's her. That's the prescription that she has at Munich. Well, we have to stop the far right. Apparently, that's really the threat, not the war in Ukraine and the dangers that poses to peace in Europe. The danger of nuclear war. Not Iran. That we're maybe on the precipice of a long, protracted war in the Middle East. No, not that. Not even about Gaza or anything like that. No, the real problem is the global far right, which is really quite interesting because it's hard to think of any really far right um, political figures who are in power anywhere. So what is then she say? Who are these far right figures? Right on cue, Rubio beelined from his revisionist MAGA speech at the Munich Security Conference to boost Orban in Hungary's elections. We must wake up before it's too late. A working class politics can defeat authoritarianism. Now, what's immediately striking here is first of all, she talks about this working class politics. I mean, what the hell does it mean? But it sounds good. Oh yeah, well, I'm a kind of I'm this leftish congresswoman, and I want working class politics. I support the working class. I mean, this is part of her ridiculous pretense that she's working class. Well, she's from the Bronx. No, she's not from the Bronx. She's from Westchester, which is close to the Bronx, but Westchester is upstate New York, and it's where affluent people, and she, of course, comes from an affluent background, but she likes to pretend she's from the hood. So she wants the working class politics, and against Orban. Now, Orban played almost no role at all at Munich. And so she's so indignant that he makes a beeline to support Orban. Now, if one looks at the policies of Orban, I mentioned about how he wants to Hungarianize the economy to prevent it from succumbing to the control of international corporations, so maintain a certain level of Hungarian ownership. But the other thing is that he actually does pursue a working class politics. He has introduced essentially the 14-month pension. So pensioners get paid not 12 months in a year, but get 14-month payments. He's repeatedly raised the minimum wage. Minimum wage, that's not something that happens in America. They don't raise the minimum wage in America. He has repeatedly raised that wage. And so, that, and he's also offered and actually implemented a policy of tax breaks for families with children. So the more children you have, the less you have to pay in taxes. So and he's hit the banks, particularly the banks who seem to have done very well out of the sovereign debt crisis in Europe around 2009, 2010. So he's hit them. So he, much more than his opponent, is actually pursuing a kind of a working class populist politics. That's not what Peter Magyar is offering. Magyar is actually offering a neoliberal agenda. Essentially, remove some of these economic controls that Orban has introduced. So she actually has no idea what she's saying. So it's somehow that Orban is against working class politics because she's been told that he's somehow on the right, which he is. He's a sort of essentially kind of a right wing populist, but that he's therefore inimical to working class populists, working class politics. And whereas Peter Magyar, who's an absolute neoliberal, he's not a leftist. I mean, Magyar is not running as a leftist. He's not running on the leftist platform. The people who used to run Hungary. I mean, they've been obliterated. They don't exist anymore. The left there. He's a former follower of Orban's, and he's running as a neoliberal. So she's somehow, this is working class politics. So Rubio is apparently he's supporting him. Now, this is also very important that these empty kind of leftist parties today, who I think are just simply created by the corporation, they don't actually present any kind of a leftish agenda. I mean, say what you want about Jeremy Corbyn, but Jeremy Corbyn is very much a traditional leftist. And when it comes to foreign policy, he has a very distinctive leftish agenda. Basically, no war. No aggression, no war against against the war in Iran. He's against Israel's war in Gaza. He's against the seizure of Maduro. He was against Libya, against the bombing of Yugoslavia. He was always against it, and that's the familiar leftish politics. But the contemporary leftish parties, who I think are just creations, they don't really have any real agenda, and that's why when you ask them, well, what's your agenda? What do you stand for? What do you want to do? They just say we're against the far right, and that's true of the Die Linke party in Germany. Well, what do you stand for? We're against the far right. We're going out to fight against the far right. That's it. That's all you have to offer. And so when we look at the profiles of her in the New York Times, and when they try to explain, well, what is this this working class politics, and what exactly does that have to do with foreign policy? We can see, well, not a great deal. And so here's the New York Times solemnly: Ocasio-Cortez offers a working class vision in Munich. No, she claims that she's offering a working class vision. But here the Times, absolutely, there's no quotes marks or anything like that. It takes it at face value that she's offering a working class vision in Munich. And then said, well, with some stumbles. And she sort of offered a forceful rebuttal to President Trump's worldview. No, she didn't. Absolutely didn't do. There's nothing at all there. And of course, Trump's foreign policy is very much open to criticism, but she didn't offer that. And so there goes, a progressive who made a name for herself focusing on economic problems at home, might have been seemed an odd fit for the Munich Security Conference and so on. But at 2 Friday panels, she tied worsening income inequality to the rise of authoritarianism, weaving her working class worldview. She's got a working class worldview into a broader message about combating far right populism and strengthening relationships with Western allies. Whoa, 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 whoa. How did that get there? You're talking about her working class worldview. Then you say, oh, well, that leads to her attack on the far right populism, even though the far right populists are actually trying to address, if you're, what's a populist? A populist is someone who actually tries to do things that are popular, namely to appeal to classes and who the working class or middle class or whatever, people who have votes. They don't appeal to special interests. They don't appeal to the moneyed classes. They appeal to ordinary people. That's what populists do. If you look at the word populist, they do things that are popular. And then somehow strengthening relationships with Western allies. Well, what's that got to do with working class worldview? What's that got to do with populists? The Western allies are pursuing policies that are the direct opposite of anything to do with populism. They are waging a war that on the European continent. It's already led to hundreds of thousands of deaths. They have absolutely consistently rejected any attempt to bring this war to a conclusion. They have cut themselves off from cheap, reliable energy, as part of their war against Russia, which has obviously cost the working class of Europe an arm and a leg, and they're suffering as a consequence of that. They're paying much more for their petrol than they used to. So this foreign policy agenda, this Western allies, which is the familiar banal refrain of this. Of outlets such as the New York Times and all the sort of policy wonks and foreign policy experts who pontificate, well, we have to maintain our Western allies. We have the Western allies. Well, there's nothing popular about that. To the contrary, they're actually very, very unpopular, these policies. And then, of course, the authoritarianism becomes very interesting. So she entirely adopts the framework of Europe's elites, the people who run Europe, the Ursula von der Leyens and Macron, Schmerz, and the rest, and of course the New York Times, in identifying authoritarianism with the kind of governments that they don't like. So the authoritarianism, oh, well, that's of course, that's Viktor Orban. Well, somebody might say, well, I would have thought authoritarianism is what the EU does. See, the EU, which through legislation such as the Digital Services Act, or the UK, now outside the EU, but drawing ever closer through the Online Safety Act, are doing precisely the authoritarian bit. They are cracking down on all expressions, all speech that elites don't like. And they're hitting companies, the social media companies, that post content that the rulers in Europe don't like. That's pretty much the classical definition of authoritarianism. But no, you see, she's so completely a creature of the elites who essentially created her. She's just an artifice of theirs. They made her. That she just parrots this nonsense that, well, who are the authoritarians? Well, that's Viktor Orban and who else? Well, I thought, oh yeah, the German, the far right party in Germany, who are nowhere near power and are unlikely ever to get power in Germany. Oh no, oh yeah, and then as later on she mentioned, oh yeah, Bolsonaro, yeah, Bolsonaro. The guy's in prison. He's so authoritarian that he's in prison. Yeah, that you can see, that, boy, that's pretty authoritarian. When you end up in the clink. Um, but you see how she just mouths these utter platitudes, working class politics and against authoritarianism. And let's go on here. And everyday people, she argued, were turning away from democracy because wealthy elites had failed to address their needs. Well, I don't know. What does that mean? They're turning away from democracy. You mean they're not voting for the parties that you want them to vote for? You said that so if it's a party that you don't want in power, then of course that's not democracy. Extreme levels of income inequality lead to social instability, she said, adding that it was an urgent priority that we get our economic houses in order and deliver material gains for the working class, or else we will fall to a more isolated world governed by authoritarians that do not deliver to working people. Well, as I said, Orban does deliver for working people. I mean the point. The extreme inequality, those it's you get that is the people who run Europe, the people who kind of created you. Well, they've been in power for a long time, so that take it up with them about the extreme income inequality. But this whole thing about the extreme levels of income inequality, that's just a familiar refrain from Bernie Sanders. Oh, income inequality. And then here, question about whether the United States should send troops to defend Taiwan if China invaded the island. She stalled for roughly 20 seconds before offering a substantive response. And it says, I think that this is such, I think that this is, of course, a very long-standing policy of the United States. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez says, before saying that the country should try to avoid reaching that point with China in the first place. Now, what the Times is doing here is, of course, profoundly dishonest, because this business about the long-standing policy doesn't. She didn't know what the long-standing policy was. She'd been briefed by this guy Matt Duss, who used to work for Bernie Sanders, and so she said, "Oh, well, the long-standing policy. So the long-standing policy was recognition that Taiwan is an integral part of China. That's the long-standing policy." So if let's say you don't know very much, this is a freebie. It's a freebie for a leftish politician to say, well, Taiwan has been recognized ever since the Shanghai Communique of 1972, ever since President Richard Nixon, that Taiwan is an integral part of China. Therefore, China cannot invade Taiwan. China, it cannot invade its own country. That's it. There's nothing complicated about it. You don't need to know a great deal. Just made you stumble or whatever. Yeah, that's it. What's the long-standing policy? I said, the long-standing policy is strategic ambiguity. No, there's no long-standing policy. The United States accepted, ever since 1972, Taiwan is an integral part of China. So how can you go to war against China if it's going to enter a piece of territory that the United States has accepted as a part of China? So there's nothing complicated about this. And so anyway, but the Times, is desperate to offer excuses for her. And then it goes on. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez was quicker to respond to questions about other foreign policy matters. Oh, goody. Such as whether she would support military strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. What a stupid thing to say. There have already been military strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. No one's talking about that. They're gone. They've been destroyed. That's not what the issue now. The issue now is hitting Iranian military facilities, hitting Iranian political leaders, including Supreme Leader Khamenei. It's hitting the IRGC command centers. That's what they're talking about. They're not talking about the Iranian nuclear facilities. So you see again what nonsense the New York Times peddles. There's still so much runway, so much more we can do to avoid that scenario, she said, and whether the U.S. should reevaluate aid to Israel, unconditional aid has enabled genocide in Gaza. Now, right away, you can say two things about that. She said there's still so much runway, so much more we can do to avoid that scenario. Well, how about saying that I think this is an unprovoked attack? Iran has not done anything wrong. It certainly hasn't done anything wrong to the United States. She's the one who's supposed to be a populist. She's like, well, working class politics. Okay, if you're a working class politics, then you say, I don't want to go into wars. These wars have nothing to do with the working class. That's generally what the Marxists used to say. And then after the Marxists, we had all the socialists and all the parties of the left always used to say, these wars are imperialist wars. They have nothing to do with the working class. They're about they only benefit the imperialists. They benefit, capitalists, corporations. Those are the people who are pushing for war. So, as representatives of the working class, we are against wars. No, it's a no-brainer. So just like with the China, it's a no-brainer. You don't need a PhD in international relations just to say no. Under no circumstances can we go to war with China if it enters its own territory. And similarly here, under no circumstances can we attack Iran for no reason. For no reason. I mean, Iran, with the nuclear facilities, they're gone. But the IRGC, the political leaders of Iran, they're not doing anything. This is an unprovoked attack. If you're supposed to working class. Who's my working class? Why are you attacking Iran? And so instead of answering that, she says, "Well, there's so much runway. We go, runway. We're not really there yet. Why would we be there anyway? Why is that even up for discussion? Why are you attacking Iran, which hasn't done anything to the United States? It's what's known as an unprovoked attack, and a practitioner of working class politics would be opposed to an unprovoked attack." And then you notice what she does when the issue of Gaza comes along. So, because she has, of course, notoriously supported appropriations for Israel, notoriously, particularly as she said about a genocide in Gaza. And then she says, "Oh, unconditional aid." Well, nobody ever gives unconditional aid. Even Trump doesn't say it's unconditional. So this is she talks about this is a straw man argument. Oh, it's unconditional. I don't want unconditional aid. Well, Biden and Trump always said it's conditional, but fundamentally they give Israel whatever it wants. And so somebody like as she has done, she has talked about a genocide in Gaza. She should say, I don't think we should be giving any money at all to a country that's perpetrating genocide. No, it's a no-brainer. If that's what she believes, and that clearly is what she believes, the genocide, she says Israel is perpetrating a genocide in Gaza. Those are strong words. If you believe that, you shouldn't be voting for any money, not one penny, for a state that you believe is committing genocide. But she said, "Oh, I'm just against unconditional aid. That's fine. If it's conditional, I'm good with that, but I don't want unconditional." Anyway, because, and then it says, a host of other Democrats, including some seen as possible presidential contenders, also traveled to Munich, seeking to offer reassurances that their party remained committed to European allies. Of course, that's the important thing. We have to show our European friends that we stand with them. And the Democrats say, well, yeah, we stand with you. It's really pathetic because this is what the Munich, and of course we had that in Davos. They absolutely detest Trump. They want to see the back of Trump, and that's why they invited so many Democrats to Munich. Essentially, they're trying to boost them and encourage them, and hope that they'll be back soon, and the good old days of the transatlantic alliance, the transatlantic supper club, will be back in action, and we're not going to have Trump going on at us and bullying us and criticizing us and so on. We're not going to have that. We'll have these dreary Democratic politicians coming along and saying, this is the most important partnership in the world, this wonderful transatlantic alliance, our closest friends and whatever. Yeah, that's it. Go back to these empty, idiotic platitudes. Mr. Trump has shaken the Western world by pulling away from NATO. No, he hasn't. He's encouraged the NATO countries to spend 5% of their GDP. So he's actually strengthened NATO, you moron. He's pulling away from NATO. Oh, that's the way you pull away, by encouraging NATO members to contribute more to NATO. Hey, stop paying, your 1%, which is about what they were paying, 1%. You got to pay 5%. So therefore, it's seizing Venezuela's president. Well, they don't care about that. So again, the New York Times here is being very deceitful by suggesting that these people at Munich were upset when they seized Maduro. They explicitly supported that. They came out in support of what Trump did with Maduro. They liked all that. Mulling an invasion of Greenland, well, he mulled and didn't do it. And threatening retaliatory tariffs against countries that defy him. Unfortunately, he didn't follow through on that. I think he should have done. I think he should have hit a number of those European countries with tariffs. And then we have, Gavin Newsom. Obviously, he's a leading contender. And then we've got Chris Murphy. Chris Murphy, people will remember from 2014. He was at Maidan along with John McCain and another Democrat, Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar. She's Minnesota nice. This very, very nice woman, Minnesota nice. There she was in Kiev in 2014, egging on this absolutely disastrous coup against the government of Yanukovych. Anyway, so that's Chris Murphy was there, and they condemned Mr. Trump for engaging in a consistent campaign to alienate our friends in Europe. It's so awful to alienate our friends in Europe. Other possible 28 Democratic presidential candidates in attendance include Senator Ruben Gallego. He's a new entry on the block. He's from Arizona. Well, they're both from Arizona. Mark Kelly, and then Gretchen Whitmer, and she's Michigan, and then Gina Raimondo, former Commerce Secretary. But Ocasio-Cortez sounded strongest when drawing a direct contrast with Mr. Trump's vision of the world. And then says they are looking to withdraw from the United States, from the entire world, so that we can turn into an age of authoritarians that can carve out a world where Donald Trump can command the Western Hemisphere and Latin America as his personal sandbox, where Putin can saber rattle around Europe. I don't understand even what any of that means. So he wants to turn into an age of authoritarians. The New York Times is impressed by this because that's the kind of nonsense that they editorialize about, and all the talking heads who go on these shows, the former ambassador to this, and former deputy assistant secretary of state for that, and so on. So he's withdraw from the United States from the entire world. So again, this is a sort of a kind of a leftish politician who essentially wants to send taxpayer money, these working class politics, send the taxes of the working class for all kinds of international boondoggles that um, enhance the power and the pocketbooks of the the rich and well connected and the corporate interests. That's where she wants the working class taxes to be spent. She urged the United States to instead deepen its bonds with allies and recommit to global projects like USAID, which is, of course, as we know, USAID, which in the old days, the left used to suspect of being a front for the CIA, which, of course, it was. That's what the USAID. It was just a mechanism for interfering in other countries' internal affairs and affecting coups, internal political crises. That was the whole point of USAID. But now she's, this is a great supporter of all of this. So that's the working class politics that obviously the New York Times approves of, and you can see, well, that's essentially mainstream transatlantic pablum. Same thing. We've had all this now for decades, and AOC very firmly within that pantheon. But she gives this radical pseudo radicalism, like working class populism. Oh yeah, this is the Bernie Sanders wing of the party. This is the real left. With that. So anyway, that was AOC. We don't have to talk about that. There's one other issue that I want to bring up, and where is it? This is, yes. So apparently, Poland, and we often like to talk about Poland here. Poland is now determined to file a lawsuit against Russia. I'm not sure where they're going to file the lawsuit, but they're going to stick Russia with a bill for I don't know, whatever, 1.5 trillion euros for all of the crimes that the Soviet Union had supposedly committed against Poland. So, if you recall, the previous government in Poland, the sort of the conservative nationalists, even though there's no difference between them, conservative nationalists, other than maybe on social policies, like when it comes to abortion and so on. But fundamentally, when it comes to foreign policy, there's not really much difference with the conservative nationalists, the Law and Justice Party that ruled Poland for a few years, and then Tusk's kind of centrist, Tusk and Radek Sikorski. So the previous bunch had decided that they're going to hit Germany with a bill for everything that the Nazi Germany had done to Poland. I think that was for about 1.2 trillion. I don't know how they made the calculation, but Germany owes us 1.2 trillion euros. Germany, doesn't pay anyone anything, with the exception of Israel. They gave money to Israel, and has given money to individuals. So individuals who are able to say, well, we suffered, by this under the Nazis. They have given compensation to individuals, and they've given money to Israel. But Germany never gave anyone any money for anything that Hitler did in World War II. So what Germany did when Poland submitted this this bill for 1.2 trillion, saying, "Well, you already settled the outstanding debts with East Germany." So, back in communist times, communist Poland had signed an agreement with communist East Germany, whereby Poland waived any claims against East Germany. So the German government said, "Well, you already signed a waiver. We don't owe you anything." So now, so that government is gone now. So, but that they're still trying to get some money out of Germany. But Tusk, as is well known, is quite favorably inclined towards Germany, and he really doesn't want to upset Berlin too much. And I think it obviously it pisses the Germans off when anyone starts submitting bills for damages rendered 80 years ago. Um, so now they've decided, now that Tusk is in power, Poland has decided, well, you know what? Instead of sticking Germany with a bill for, 1 trillion, 1.5 trillion, or whatever euros, why don't we stick it to Russia and say that Russia owes us all this money? And the claims kind of go back quite a long way. So here is the story in the Financial Times. Um, so that Poland extends war reparations campaign to Russia. Warsaw has already sought to claim 1.3 trillion euros from Germany for Second World War losses and damages. Poland is preparing a reparations claim against Russia for atrocities committed during Soviet dominance of the country, echoing its demand for 1.3 trillion in compensation from Germany for Second World War crimes. And so Bartosz, so this is Polish name, Bartosz Gondek, director of an institute tasked by Prime Minister Donald Tusk with investigating historic Russian crimes, said the probe would be far more extensive than its work on Nazi brutality. Well, I bet it will be, given the more than 4 additional decades during the Cold War that Poland remained under Soviet influence. So it's going to be not just everything that you did during World War II, which was in the case of Germany. So they said, okay, well, that was 1939 through to 1945. But this is really, they got all the years of communist Poland, and they're going to stick Russia with the bill for that. Pursuing a claim risks escalating tensions with Moscow. That's a good insight. At a time when Warsaw has accused Vladimir Putin of intensifying his hybrid warfare, particularly after an incursion last September by Russian drones in Polish airspace. Tusk's government also claims Poland is now the most frequent target of Russian cyber attacks. Yeah, Tusk is always making these claims. Like the explosion on the railway track. We talked about this the other day, where I look and I look, and I still don't see the damage. I mean, it looks like a railway track. I don't see anything damaged there. But anyway, the cyber attacks. Quite how they know the cyber attacks in Russia, but okay. And whether it's the Russian government, but no one asks such questions. It's obviously the Russians. So that's it. Just like the Soviet Union, well, that's of course the Russians. While it has detained several people who are allegedly spying for Russia. So that allegedly, okay. And then Gondek said it was premature to discuss whether compensation sought from Moscow could exceed the amount demanded from Berlin in 2022. So it's premature. It may even be more than 1.3 trillion. His team of about 10 Polish historians and researchers faced greater obstacles than those encountered when calculating the German claim. Polish historians cannot gain access to highly sensitive Russian archives, and many relevant documents were falsified or destroyed during Soviet times. Well, I think it's going to be a problem, hey, we want to get into the Russian archives because actually the archives are open, but I mean, if you're going to go in there, the reason why we want to see these archives is that we want to calculate how much we can bill you for all the terrible things you did to us. They probably are going to have difficulties to gain access to highly sensitive Russian archives. And then it says Poland's claim against Germany remains unresolved and contentious, including domestically. Germany has argued that the issue of reparations was closed legally after the Second World War. Meanwhile, Poland's right-wing opposition, Law and Justice Party, claims Tusk has not done enough to try to force Berlin to pay out. I'm not sure how you get, force Berlin to pay out. They're not going to do it. They never have, so it just ain't going to happen. So I'm not quite sure how you force them to do it. Tusk's pro-EU coalition replaced the Law and Justice Party in 2023. And then Arkadiusz Mularczyk, this Law and Justice Party member of the European Parliament, who led the 2022 claim against Germany, said his party had always intended to pursue a demand against Russia at a later date. Well, I don't think anyone doubts that. We stick Germany with the bill, and then we stick Russia with the bill. But he accused Tusk of trying now to use grievances against Moscow to deflect attention from the stagnation in talks with Berlin over German reparations. There's no stagnation. The Germans are just saying no. Raising the issue of reparations from Russia is, in essence, an attempt to avoid the core issue, the still unresolved responsibility of Germany, Mularczyk told the FT. And then the Kremlin has long denied atrocities such as the 1940 Katyn massacre, in which about 22,000 Polish army officers and civilians were executed shortly after Germany and the Soviet Union partitioned Poland. Then he says, however, Russia's parliament finally acknowledged in 2010 the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had ordered the killings. Now, there's a lot wrong here in what it says here. First of all, the story of the Germany and the Soviet Union partitioning Poland is a very familiar story, but it's not really correct. Poland had seized this territory. There was the territory of was not allocated to Poland by the Paris Peace Conference, but Poland seized this territory while the Soviet Union was embroiled in the Civil War. So they decided to grab this piece of territory. The Paris Peace Conference had believed that the border between Poland and, but it wasn't called the Soviet Union then, but the Poland, what we just called it for Soviet Union for just for the sake of ease, that border should be considerably to the west of that. That was known as the Curzon Line. And of course, the Curzon Line famously was used by Stalin again and again during World War II, saying that the border between the Soviet Union and Poland should be at the Curzon Line, because that was the Marquis of Curzon himself who said that's where the border should be. Poland, however, didn't do that. Poland seized this territory. And then at the Treaty of Riga, the Soviet Union just accepted that for the time being as the border between Poland and the Soviet Union. Now, in September 1939, Hitler attacked Poland. And once he attacked Poland, and essentially Poland had ceased to exist, then essentially the Treaty of Riga, became null and void. And it's very important to remember that the Soviet Union only stepped in on September the 17th. So Hitler attacks Poland on September the 1st. Great Britain and France declare war on Nazi Germany on September the 3rd. Stalin doesn't enter until September the 7th, and essentially he did it on the basis, well, we need to protect our own people. Now they're going to say, oh yeah, but that was the secret protocols between the Molotov-Ribbentrop. And it's true, yeah, there were the secret protocols, but that's neither here nor there. It was Germany's project to attack Poland. Germany was always going to do that. That wasn't in any way dependent upon Stalin. Stalin, he didn't need Stalin's permission. He didn't need Stalin's authorization. There was no plan with Stalin to attack Poland. Germany was always going to attack Poland, and since that was going to happen, then the Soviet Union will say, well, okay, well, since Poland's going to cease to exist, we will then reassert our claim on territories that were taken from us at the Treaty of Riga. And that's why, and that's really always the problem. So they always say, oh, Hitler and Stalin partitioned Poland. There was no partition of Poland. Hitler invaded Poland. He was always going to do that. The issue of Danzig was a long-standing, very sore point between Germany and Poland. Poland didn't want to make any kind of accommodations to Hitler, so they decided they were going to keep Danzig, and as we're seeing, watching here, Poland's very good at antagonizing great powers to its east and to its west. I mean, it kind of did that in the 1930s, managed to antagonize Germany, but also managed to antagonize the Soviet Union. So something not dissimilar from what it's doing now. So that's really every time they say this now. They bring up Katyn. Katyn's always been a very murky story. It's I think an odd story. Who authorized this has always been very strong. I don't think Stalin authorized it, and quite what was the point of this this massacre? I think it was always certainly a very nasty affair. But however, that even if let's say you accept everything about the official story, the rest of Poland's claims are, however, very, very flimsy, because ultimately Poland was liberated by the Red Army. So if you're going to start billing the Soviet Union, and of course, but in this case you're billing Russia, then they're going to say, we're going to bill you for all of the lives we lost liberating you from Nazi occupation. This is where it gets kind of murky, because absolutely this is what the Russians are going to say. Well, if you hit us with whatever 1.5 trillion, 2 trillion, 3 trillion euro bill, we're going to hit you with an even bigger bill for the number of citizens of the Soviet Union who lost their lives liberating Poland. And then, of course, they'll say afterwards, all the aid and that we offered you once it was liberated. We had to provide you with food and whatever. And of course, we liberated the death camps that were in Poland, like Auschwitz and the rest. I don't know that Poland really wants to go down that path. But anyway, here then is, this goes on, But since Russia's full scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Putin has promoted a revisionist account of history that has also targeted Poland. Well, the revisionist account of history that he launched was entirely that was it was in response, if you recall, in September of 2019, the European Parliament, at the instigation of Poland, had issued this resolution condemning the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany for launching World War II. Now, obviously, the Soviet Union didn't appreciate that, and since the Soviet Union, then I'm saying the Soviet Union, Russia didn't appreciate that, and particularly as the Russians say, well, hey, we suffered more than anyone else, and we were the ones who essentially broke the back of Nazi Germany, not you. Cretins at the European Parliament, who come from countries that actually were aligned with Hitler. And so this is that's when he wrote that essay. It was a long essay. So Putin, as you know, he wrote these two essays. One was about Ukraine, but the one he did before that was the one on the origins of World War II. It was a very very World War III. It's an interesting essay. But the point that he was making there was that the Soviet Union, you can criticize its foreign policy all you want, but was not doing anything different from every other power that was trying to placate Hitler, including and especially including Poland, which had consistently pursued during the 1930s a very warm relationship with Nazi Germany that culminated in Poland taking a piece of Czechoslovakia after the Munich Agreement. If you recall, they took a nice piece of land from Czechoslovakia, and so that was the problem for Poland, is that Poland was assumed that it could help itself, take all sorts of prizes that Germany was offering, but that he wouldn't have to pay a price down the road. But the price was always obvious, and because Germany had made no secret of the fact that it intended to get Danzig back. I mean, as a sore point, it was that we're not going to go on indefinitely accepting that Danzig was now, was lost to Germany. Um, and so that was that long essay that Putin wrote. He said, well, what Stalin did was in the same mold. Poland did this. They signed these non-aggression pacts. Poland, in fact, did sign. Was one of the earliest states that signed a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany. And what Chamberlain and Daladier did at Munich, which was that we have to go the extra mile to avoid a war with Germany. And so the Stalin did exactly that. And Stalin's view, which was the responsible view, was that this war with Germany is bound to come. Germany is going to attack us. We need to have as much time to recover, as much time and space to recover from an attack as possible. Therefore, it makes sense for us to move our western borders as far west as possible in order to give us space to recover, which is in fact what happened. I mean, so the territories that Stalin took in 1939 to 40, and that obviously that included the eastern territories of Poland. Then, of course, included Bessarabia and Bukovina from Romania. That, of course, included the Baltic states. That included a piece of Finland. All of it provided the Soviet Union some breathing room in order to recover in the event of the attack from Nazi Germany that that was inevitable. So that was really the rationale for what Stalin did. So Putin didn't really defend Stalin's policy. He just said, well, that was not different from what everybody else was doing at that time. Um, and so anyway, let's just finish off this FT piece. And then in 2023, the then chair of the Russian parliament, Vyacheslav Volodin, suggested that Poland should pay Russia 750 billion for liberating it at the end of the Second World War. Yeah, I mean, I think they absolutely will. If Poland actually does present Russia with this bill, then Russia would absolutely hit it with an even bigger bill for how much it cost the Soviet Union to liberate Poland from Nazi occupation. Last month, the head of Russia's Federal Archives, Andrei Artizov, said that a study commissioned by Putin showed that Poland had undermined Soviet efforts to work with Britain and France against Germany to prevent the outbreak of the Second World War. Poland denies the allegation. Well, that's very interesting because, after Munich, the Chamberlain and believed that ultimately we can stop the disintegration of Czechoslovakia. We can just limit it to handing the Sudetenland over to Germany, but everything else would just remain intact. So really, Chamberlain didn't appreciate Poland helping itself to a piece of Czechoslovakia. And of course, that, and of course, Hungary also then took a piece, and that led to the complete collapse of what was left of Czechoslovakia. But I think that's what the Russians are getting at, is saying you essentially seize this opportunity to aggrandize yourself, much as you seized on our civil war to help yourself to a piece of our territory. And so therefore, you're not exactly deserving of a lot of sympathy. And anyway, let's just go on a little bit more. And Poland denies the allegation. Okay. Paweł Machkiewicz, a Polish historian, said Tusk was probably pursuing two political objectives by demanding an Eastern report into Soviet crimes. First, his government wants to counter Putin's mounting disinformation campaign against Poland. The disinformation campaign, when it's a problem when somebody writes an essay that you don't like, because that's the story, a fake phony story that everyone had believed since the end of World War II, that Poland was this innocent victim set upon by these two horrible totalitarian powers, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. So if you start bringing up, well, actually, let's track the record of Polish diplomacy between the wars, and suddenly it doesn't look quite so good. This is part of the disinformation campaign. Second, Tusk is seeking to show public opinion that not only the right wing and the Law and Justice Party care about Polish interests. Polish interests. Hey, we're going to get 3 trillion euros. So I support Polish interests. Well, anyone would support Polish interests. Just give us the money. Since taking office last summer, Polish President Karol Nawrocki, this is the Law and Justice person, has been pressing Berlin over reparations. So Nawrocki said last month, during a speech at Auschwitz, so Nawrocki said, to this day, the German state has not paid reparations to Poland for the evils of the Second World War. So this is Nawrocki said, so he used the occasion of Auschwitz, to which, of course, the Russians were not invited, as to the actual liberators of Auschwitz, but okay. Um, so for the evils of the Second World War, Germany has not paid reparations. Germany has paid no reparations to anyone. It's just it hasn't done it. So it's not an anti-Polish thing. It's just that Germany hasn't done it. This is not how you build a world of peace. No, the way you build a world of peace is to stick other countries, to your neighbors on either side of you, with a bill for all past sins committed against you. That's the way to build peace. And then, despite its refusal of Poland's war reparations claim, Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz has recently taken other small conciliatory steps. Oh, from committing to build a Polish memorial in Berlin to returning looted Polish artifacts. I love this. You mean here we are, this is 2026, and Germany's been holding on to these looted Polish artifacts for 80 years. So in other words, they're holding these looted Polish artifacts for 80 years, and you seriously think they're going to give you some money? They're going to give you €1 trillion? And I don't know what this Polish memorial in Berlin. I don't know. I don't know what they're gonna what that means. So, I guess they'll build a Polish cultural center, which the Polish government is going to have to fork over the money. But yeah, let's have a Polish cultural center in Berlin, but you pay for it. We are discussing further possibilities for appropriate humanitarian gestures towards the Polish people, Merz said in December after meeting Tusk. I ask for your understanding that we are not naming any sums here, but please rest assured that the German government, which I lead, is very aware of its historical responsibility towards our neighbor Poland. And that's all you're going to get from us. Nice words and so on, but forget any serious money. That's just not going to. Let's not talk about money. It's so deleterious to friendship. When we start talking, money breaks friendships. No, let's just talk about building a Polish memorial in Berlin. Anyway, so let's now go over to our locals page and talk to the Gagglers, the people who maintain the dogs, people who kind of worry about the state of the dogs, the mood of the dogs, how depressed they get, because when they look at the tip jar and they can't, they can't raise their spirits because the tip jar just isn't filling up at the clip that they would expect. So really appreciate the generosity of our Gagglers for thinking about the dogs. But so thank you so much. Thank you, Gagglers. So first off, Stone River. Thank you, Stone River. As always, thank you for your generosity. So Stone River says, George, are there any cases in history when a systematic march to war was stymied by forces pushing for peace? I ask with a little trepidation. That's a very that's an interesting question. I can't think of it. I think that it's nearly always the other way around, which is that the few distant voices for peace are nearly always easily crushed, and therefore, when there is the enthusiasm for war, you're going to get the war. Now, I think there probably are instances where leaders have made a decision on rational grounds that going to war was probably not a good idea. It wasn't because of the lot of marches for peace. They just thought this would not be a great idea for the country. I think in the immediate aftermath of Vietnam, the United States was quite wary getting into any more entangling military conflicts. I mean, it just did little things, but was wary of doing any big things, any big military intervention. So 1973, the United States withdraws from Vietnam, and pretty much not until I was thinking of what would be when the U.S. used force in a kind of decisive way. Probably not till about 1989, when the United States invaded Panama to seize Noriega. The United States was kind of wary of waging wars against others. I mean, there were military engagements. Grenada, which was a kind of ridiculous thing, and then of course the United States put its forces, somewhat haplessly into Lebanon, which ended in disaster. But Reagan withdrew the forces, didn't want to go further. So I mean, so there was a certain wariness about marching to war after Vietnam, but that was already long ago, and everyone's already forgotten that. I remember in Britain in the 1960s, when Rhodesia declared independence from Great Britain, and of course the Labour government was in power at the time, and so there was a lot of people within the Labour Party who were very indignant about essentially the inauguration of a white minority rule in Africa. So, right, because Rhodesia really, when it declared independence, it declared independence, and under the condition of that is going to be ruled by a white minority, and that white minority was, of course, the English settlers in Rhodesia, because basically the white settlers were not going to accept majority rule in Rhodesia. So when Ian Smith essentially declared independence from Great Britain, this caused fury um, among the Labour Party, the left of the Labour Party, and then there was some pressure on Harold Wilson to use force against Rhodesia to bring them to heel, and then and it was a question on whether is Great Britain going to use force to bring this secession, this unilateral secession of Rhodesia. Is it going to use force to bring it to an end? And Wilson decided not to do it. So there were demands that he use force. Wilson decided not to do it. It's not clear why he did decide that. There was a lot of speculation that he couldn't trust the loyalty of the British Army. Because in those days the British Army was very different from the sort of kind of woke army that it is today. So that British Army really would not have appreciated using force against the white settlers in Rhodesia. I don't know for sure whether that was the reason why Wilson decided not to use force, but I mean I'm thinking of an example when there was pressure to use force, and essentially the government decided, well, maybe that's not such a great idea. But most cases, I mean, when you ask me, then most cases there is a march to war. There's always the drumbeat. There's always good reasons for going to war. We got to bomb this, bomb that. We got to stop, this. Saddam Hussein, stop Milosevic, stop whoever, Gaddafi. All these bad guys, and there are a few forlorn voices. They demonstrate, they protest. They have no effect at all, and often they just end up in prison, like in the United States, like Eugene Debs and so on. So maybe some other people can think of examples, but I can't think of examples where a peace movement um, stopped a war. Anyway, thank you so much, Stone River. And then Vic Shakapopoulos says, "Dear George, your show has cured me from the optimism regarding the inevitable and imminent collapse of Western hegemony, and that's one of the reasons I value it a lot." Well, thank you very much. Now, what do you expect as the worst possible scenario that possibly awaits us in the future? I'm asking just to prepare myself psychologically. Well, I think that for the time being, I think in my lifetime, and perhaps yours, we're going to be living with Western hegemony for quite a while. There's been a lot of hooey, a lot of very delusional talk that we've many of us, and even I to a certain extent, accepted over the years, that now the power is shifting in the world, and then somehow Western hegemony is coming to an end, and then China's going to do this, and Russia's going to do that, and that somehow the era of Western power is over. The unipolar moment is over. And we listen to these dreary speeches from Lavrov about multipolarity and what else. So, as we've seen, really, there's no serious threat to American hegemony. And they basically get to do whatever they want. The West gets to do whatever they want. We saw the ease. I mean, here, the ease with which Israel was able to deal with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah was part of this whole multipolar structure that somehow Israel is now boxed in because you got Hezbollah here, you got Iran there, and there are all these proxies and so on. Well, turned out to be a dud. Hezbollah wasn't able to do anything. Iran is fighting for its life. I don't know whether the United States is going to attack or it's not going to attack, but Iran is facing some peril right now, and don't know how that's going to work out. But that's a long way from Iran being able to exert its power in the Middle East. I mean, Iran may well survive, but it's not exerting any power in the Middle East. So, and I have to say, other parts of the world, they're not really going too well for the anti-Western camp. Armenia and Azerbaijan are now basically both of them. Even though they don't particularly like each other, they've yet to sign their peace treaty, but they're basically both of them now in the Western camp. Those are two critical allies of Russia's, and we still have this war in Ukraine, which it's hard to see how it can end in a way that would seem like a great victory for Russia. I mean, as I've said before, even if the best happens, and Russia takes the Donbass, you still have the problem, which is that government is there in Ukraine. It's still going to be there. NATO is still going to be there. You're still going to have that problem of this NATOized European continent, a militarized, NATOized, Russophobic continent, which is a permanent enemy of Russia's. It's permanent, can be on a war footing against Russia. So it's hard to see how that challenges Western hegemony. So that's kind of my view, that there isn't any real basis for optimism. But I know there are the usual purveyors who tell us that Iran's going to do this, and Russia's going to do that, and China's going to do the other, and yeah, all right. Good luck with waiting for all of that. Anyway, thank you, Vic. And then Vic says, what is in the cards? A 1917 style collapse of Russia, a Libya-Syria scenario for Iran, and the further expansion of the Zionist entity and NATO direct intervention in Ukraine, a nuclear war, or all of the above, how would you estimate the chances of these events happening? Um, well, that's very. I mean, those are all very dire scenarios, but not at all impossible. Um, at the moment, as far as Ukraine goes, it seems like it's just going to go on for quite a while. Trump kind of wants to bring it to some kind of a conclusion, but he doesn't feel that strongly about it. I think he no longer sees Russia as a great power. So if Trump believed at some point, during the last few years, that China is the power we have to worry about, therefore we need Russia on our side against China. I don't think he thinks that anymore, right? I just don't think, and he's said it as much, that, well, if Russia is unable to finish Ukraine off, then it's taken 4 years, but it still can't finish Ukraine off. Then how is it a great power? I think that's his thinking, and so he does want to bring it to an end, but his heart isn't really in it. He's not that committed to that policy, which is why he hasn't really pursued it with any great vigor or energy. All he's done is to tell the Europeans, okay, you have to pay for it. You want this war? I don't want this war. This war doesn't interest me. It's not my war. But if you want this war, then you pay for it. We'll provide you with the weapons, but you have to pay for it. And since the Europeans are keen to keep this war going, then basically they're going to keep sending money to the United States. That's about all Trump has done. Now, so I think that's going to go on for a while. A 1917 style collapse, you need a serious, I think, a military defeat before that happens. That I have my doubts about. I don't think either side, for the foreseeable future, will be able to inflict that kind of a defeat on the other. So I don't think that's going to happen. So we can rule out the 1917 style collapse for the time being. Who knows? But I just don't see the collapse on either side. A Libya-Syria scenario for Iran, that's possible. That's possible. I always wonder whether Trump has some kind of a trick up his sleeve. That if he launches an attack, would there be does he think that some kind of a collapse of government will happen inside Iran, something like that. But it seems as if the Iranian government had really cracked down hard on the protesters, rioters a few weeks ago. I mean, this was a pretty brutal suppression, so they were taking it seriously. In other words, they decided that we're not going to go down the Syrian path, we're not going to go down the Libyan path. So they really hit the opposition. So I don't know to what extent they still are, that the opposition are any kind of a serious force, whether they would be able to put people out onto the streets and try to seize power. I have my doubts, but that's a possibility, and maybe Trump is thinking along those lines, that within Iran there'll be people who will try to seize power. Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to see whether the government had managed to eliminate all of the opposition. Now, the further expansion of the Zionist entity, well, that's also a very interesting, because we have the Board of Peace. So that's the Board of Peace is meeting later this week. But we also have Netanyahu issuing all kinds of threats about going back into Gaza, disarming Hamas, and so on. So the question then is, how committed is Trump to his project? I mean, that's his project. The Board of Peace is bringing all these people into Washington to attend this inaugural meeting. And if Netanyahu decides he's going to go in to Gaza, then Trump kind of looks a little foolish. Um, but ultimately, that's what it would have to be. Now, further expansion of the Zionist entity. Well, I think that's quite likely. I mean, they're already doing it in the West Bank, essentially, building more and more of the settlements, and yeah, that I think that I think we can put in the very likely column, and then the other one, NATO direct intervention in Ukraine. That's I think is quite likely, but I think that we have to wait a few years for. I think if this war goes on, and it seems to me that it's going to go on to 2029, 2030, I do think that at that moment NATO would be ready to intervene directly. So I'm not buying into this thing about NATO is a joke and they'll never be able to put any kind of armed forces together. 3 or 4 years, yeah, absolutely, they can do that. I mean, you only have to think in terms, all of the NATO powers. What is it? There are 32 NATO powers. So, and we're talking, all right, we're talking about the Europeans. They only have to raise an army of a few 100,000. Well, you can do that, provided you offer enough financial incentives to people. I mean, I remember. I mean, you can absolutely buy people for any kind of a project. Offer them enough money to serve in the military. Basically free university education afterwards, job for life after the university. Why not? After all, Russia provides financial incentives for people to go and fight in Ukraine. You pay people enough, they'll go fight in Ukraine. So absolutely, Europeans can do it. I mean, the idea that it's impossible, the Europeans will never do it. Absolutely, the Europeans can do it. Just offer enough money, and people will join the military. And as I said, there's also the mercenaries. You can always find mercenaries around the world. Also, they'll be tempted with offers of substantial payments. There are already mercenaries fighting in Ukraine. So it's already happening. So I know people dismiss it. Oh, it can't happen. Well, of course, it can happen. There are already mercenaries fighting in Ukraine. So that all of that can be done. So I do think that if this war goes on into 2029, 2030, by which time Russia will have been fighting for 8 years, that's a long time. That's quite exhausting. And NATO is still at that stage have been barely bloodied. NATO still hasn't lost any lives, as far as we can tell. So then that's the time when you can step in. So your opponent is exhausted and you're still fresh. So I think that's a possibility. Nuclear war, well, that's that's always on the horizon. That you can you can never discount that. But anyway, thank you, Vic, for this interesting question. And Cynthia, always very good to see you, Cynthia. I should mention, as I always do, but it's very important that I mention it, that Cynthia is our resident film critic, film scholar, film encyclopedist, film expert with a massive knowledge of cinema history, the cinema production, and she contributes an enormous amount of to our information about the making of films, and particularly she contributes to our weekly screenings, where we always screen something very good, something very interesting, and to accompany these films, Cynthia provides really a very strong background information, kind of a background primer with an enormous amount of fascinating, intriguing um, details about the making of the film, but also very, very intriguing aesthetic comments, judgments, observation about the film, so that you can watch it and say, "Well, I missed that, and I didn't quite see that." But Cynthia always points out, well, these are the important things to look out for. So it's very, and I was in fact suggesting that we might actually publish at some point a kind of the gaggle with Cynthia's comments on all of the films that we have screened, and so it'll be quite a rich production, because it's just so people can watch the films, but then we'll have a collection of Cynthia's comments. So that's really something that we can look forward to. So thank you so much, Cynthia. And anyway, yesterday we screened La Règle du Jeu, one of the greatest films ever made. Some people may not agree that it's one of the greatest films, but nonetheless, film scholars believe it to be one of the greatest. As Jean Renoir, made in 1939. It was kind of received poorly originally, but then it was accepted as one of the outstanding classics, starting around the 1960s. So watch it, see what you think. Do you think it deserves the plaudits? Is it one of the greatest films ever made? So watch that, and above all, read Cynthia's very informed, very learned and interested comments. Anyway, Cynthia says, Brussels plans to fast-track a 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine, raising the funds on international debt markets backed by the EU's long-term budget. Ukraine only has to repay it if it wins the war, and Russia pays the reparations. Yeah, that's the theory. That's how they're putting it. So Russia, that's right. They have to pay. Russia pays the reparations. So in other words, that's yeah, exactly. So in other words, basically, it never gets paid. Otherwise, EU member states are on the hook. That's right. The real question is which investors will actually buy these bonds. A risky move that could end up like flushing money down the golden toilet. That's a very good point. I think it's very hard to see how they do it. I mean, the EU has to provide some kind of a guarantee that this will be repaid. Otherwise, I mean, no one's going to buy bonds if they don't, if the likelihood of repayment isn't there. I mean, that made sense during the heyday last December, when they were thinking they were going to seize Russia's sovereign assets. I mean, if they could do that, and then they had that money at their disposal. But since they don't have that, I don't quite see how these bonds can be sold. So yeah, I agree with you. It's if you're going to give the money, you're just going to have to give the money. I mean, you doing it this way by floating bonds, that isn't going to work. I mean, so it's going to have to come out of um, the EU member states' budgets. That's the only way that this can be done. But otherwise, it's just the money just isn't there. So I agree with that. Thank you. And then Cynthia says, Zelensky wants Ukraine to become a major arms exporter. Yes, he does. But with Russian forces targeting domestic factories, the plan is to build Ukrainian production facilities abroad in Germany, Baltics, and the Nordics. The 90 billion EU loan will finance them, effectively shuffling taxpayer money through foreign sites while claiming it's homegrown, turning military aid into a clever high stakes money laundering scheme disguised as national production. No, I think so. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I mean, in principle, they could probably build it in Ukraine as well, as long as it's sufficiently protected from attack. But yeah, I mean, they can build it anyway. So because Russia has up until now determined that it isn't going to attack any territory, any NATO territory, only Ukraine. So even though Russia says rightly that this war is being waged by NATO as a whole, using Ukraine as a proxy, but it's NATO that we're fighting. Russia has limited its attacks to Ukrainian territory. So, in principle, there's no reason why you couldn't build um, drone sites, missile sites, or military equipment sites, absolutely anywhere else. And I think that is happening. That is going to happen, and that's what I was saying earlier. That um, I think Europe will gradually increase its investments in its own military-industrial complex. I think that is coming, and this is natural. This is all being hailed by sort of liberals. Oh well, that's really bad for Trump. So great, because as long as it's something that Trump doesn't like, then it's good. No, it means essentially you get the militarization of Europe. So that's where this is all going. So it's the Europeans are going to have their own, um, military factories, and obviously with a view down the road of getting involved directly in the war. Um, so yeah, I mean it's shuffling taxpayer money. Yes, it is shuffling taxpayer money through these sites. Um, but I think that's where where the Europeans are heading. Um, they have an option ending this war. They're not going to end this war. So if you're not going to end this war, then you've got to start thinking in terms of your own military industrial complex. You can't just keep funneling all this money to the Americans. I mean, Trump is saying that, yeah, yeah, give us the money. You can buy your military equipment from us. But obviously, Europeans are going to say, no. Why should we do that? Why, if it's our money, we might as well spend it on our own military-industrial complex. Um, and yeah, no, so I agree with you, Cynthia. So thank you so much, Cynthia. And then Robert, always good to see you, Robert. Who's a kind of resident kind of philosopher and political thinker. And Robert says Nancy Fraser, a Columbia political philosopher. So it was I always know with Robert there's the cultural intellectual tone of the discussion always goes up a few notches. So we're going to talk now political philosophy. Nancy Fraser, Columbia political philosopher, known for critiquing neoliberal feminism, okay, argues feminism has partly was absorbed by elite institutions. Representation rose while core economic structures stayed intact. Yeah. From Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Kaya Kallas and Ursula von der Leyen, leadership diversity boosts legitimacy even as corporate power grows. Oh, then that's absolutely right. That's what it amounted to. Yeah, you bring on female faces. Yeah, well, we got this woman and that woman, but fundamentally everything remains the same. So when they say something is diversity, I mean, there's no real diversity there. There's no diversity of viewpoints. It's just well, we have gender diversity. Look at all these women who are in positions, but these women who are in these positions of power, they are at least as, if not more, belligerent than their male colleagues. I mean, look, if you just look at the entire kind of leadership of the EU, von der Leyen, Kaya Kallas, this Roberta Metsola, and then of course we've had all these people like the Finn chick and the rest of them. They are all absolutely determined on war. So all of the kind of the feminism, people remember the feminism of the 19, I guess, 70s and 80s, that somehow women would bring a kind of a nurturing, caring, peace loving approach to world affairs. I mean, it's all nonsense. They didn't bring any of that. So it's that's what essentially what is this diversity? Yeah, you put women into these corporate positions, but it doesn't matter. It's a woman, it's a man. You're basically doing the same thing. And that so that was that if you think, well, what then is feminism? Okay, so it threw women into the labor force. All right, that's it. Didn't really change anything very much. But that was that was the great um, uh, victory of feminism. So but as we looked at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she comes along with this kind of pseudo leftism, and with working class politics and whatnot. But as we examine everything she says, this is no different from what any war hawk will say at any time. That's why they're happy with her. That's why she went to Munich and everyone was delighted with her performance. They not one person thought there, whoa, this working class politics, this is something we can't cope with. This is a real threat to us, real threat to our the political system. No, so, yeah, fantastic. Give us working class politics, and let's set you against the far right, because at the moment, um, in Europe and I think in the United States, what they call the far right is the only political grouping that is opposed to war. I mean, they're the ones who actually are against uh, spending more money uselessly in Ukraine. They're the only ones who are actually opposed to bombing Iran. So that's the far right. And Ocasio Cortez comes along and tells them at the NATO HQ and at Munich, and doubtless next time at Davos, that yeah, the big threat is the far right. And I say, yeah, right on. Yeah, we hate the far right because they're opposed to our our agenda. Yeah, that's it. You want to call it working class politics? Absolutely, working class politics. You think it's the far right? Absolutely. Let's hit the far right. Let's outlaw the far right. We're down for that. So that's it. That's the sum and substance of a radical challenge to the status quo. Anyway, thank you so much, Robert. It was a really interesting question. And so thank you. I think my time is up. So thank you, everybody who had joined us. And thank you for everyone who contributed so many interesting questions. Everyone, of course, who put money into the tip jar. And the dogs will soon be waking. The first thing they do, they check the tip jar. Second thing they do, they express their disgust with me and everything that I stand for. And but that's the way. That's always been like that. But thank you, everyone who nonetheless contributed something to the tip jar. So we'll be back on Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Please, before that, watch La Règle du Jour, read Cynthia's comments. It's well worth your time. Until Thursday, all the best. Good night. Bye-bye.